All
This is
right.
creepy. Oh my gosh, people can see us. So yeah, I feel like we should be tweeting about it. So I'm gonna pull up my phone
All right.
um, because right now we have zero viewers.
Okay. Well, um,
Is
hopefully
like
they'll get
YouTube dead? Is that what happened? YouTube died, and people are like, we use Instagram now. So what are you doing with your life?
I have noticed that I don't use YouTube as much
Right.
recently.
I haven't been on YouTube in like 2 years. So we'll just
I
have to.
still go sometimes because I used to have like Apple Music,
Yeah.
and I my trial run ran out. So sometimes if I don't have a song, that's pretty much the only reason I use YouTube.
That's legit. Yeah, I listen to instrumentals. I'm like, I have a book to read. Let me go on YouTube and find these random instrumentals that somebody has put up here. Okay, so we have a total of one viewer. So we need to wait until people join. I think we can go for an hour. We have some interesting questions that I think are going to be pretty
Yeah,
good.
I thought the questions were dope.
I thought so too. I was kind of excited about that. How was your day, by the way, Hari? How are you doing?
I'm doing well. My uh, transition into full-time writerly life is interesting.
Sure, it's not
Mostly
a
just because I'm not that great at managing my own time. Or at least I could be better at it.
yeah.
Uh, but I had a lot of big deadlines early this week, and that is
Yeah.
now over. So hopefully, I can regain a little bit of my stability. How are
Yeah.
you?
I mean, it's Chicago and it's spring and it's cold. So there's that.
It's
Um,
warmed up here like yesterday. It hasn't warmed up there yet.
no, I don't think we have warm. It's like we have summer
And
and
it's
and winter.
cold.
That's literally it. Um, oh, so Akudo is saying that she can see us, but there's a very strong echo. But I can't hear it though.
Uh, we both have our headphones on too, so
Right, that's interesting. I guess we're gonna have to pray on it. 'Cause, that's about all the answers I have for that. Um, wait, so Lakudo can see us, and we have two viewers, and that's not good because we need to have other folks besides our staff watching the live chat. This is why we
right.
need to wait. She said it sounds good now, so okay, we're good now. This is why we need to have us living in the same area code. That would be critically important go forward. I guess that means I have to move because
Living.
you're not leaving New York, are you?
I mean, it's cold. I'm not going to Chicago, but
I'm not staying in Chicago, so that's not. Yeah, I'll probably be going to DC next. So okay, we can get started, and people can join as they feel free to. But basically, we should probably say what this is. So we are the managing editor, deputy editor of Black Youth Project. And Black Youth Project is interesting because it's been around for like quite some time, but I think a lot of people are just discovering it. So, and that's for a host of reasons, just because, there's Black Youth Project, the kind of parent organization, there's BYP 100, and we all do kind of very different things. So I'm excited that we have more people who are kind of discovering our writing and research, which is kind of what our end is. Charlene is national chair of BYP 100, and they are the kind of activist wing. So it's important. I wanted to like kind of separate that out at the outset so that people would get an idea of what we do and what the conversation will be about. So we got 5 questions, and the first question is not a question that I'm going to be answering because it has nothing to do with me. So I'm going to read it, Hari. Okay.
okay.
So the first question says, Is there a such thing as cis passing non-binary person who isn't trans, or does that just make them cis? Not a jab at you, Hari, of course, but I'm just curious to know your choice of they, them pronouns, although you, or at least from what I can garner from social media, pass, and that's in air quotes, as a cis man. Can one personally disidentify? I've never heard that term like that. It's kind of interesting. Can one personally disidentify from cisness and that's that? Or is it more performance and also proximity to queer antagonistic violence that's homophobic, transphobic? That determines if you are actually performing out of your gender assigned at birth. And there's more question, hold on. I've been struggling with this too, as I don't feel cis per se. Also am read as male most of the time, which I was assigned at birth. And that's really all that matters, question mark. I don't have answers, but would love for you both to discuss.
Yeah, so I used to do a lot more writing about my gender than I do now, and I'm still trying to figure out why that is. One is that I don't have a lot of the time to do my own writing. Most of what I write now is stuff that I've been commissioned to write, but also there was kind of a point where I feel like I reached a barrier in my understanding of my gender journey, and that barrier, as is most barriers, are um, blackness, and where blackness intersects with a lot of the language that we have. I think that it just necessarily throws things into disarray, and things stop making sense in a lot of ways. But my as far as pronouns go, I go by both he, him, and they, them. I don't have a huge preference for they. I use it in most of my like writing and stuff, just to be clear, because most people will assume that I only go by he or and him. But if anyone asks, those are both mine, and I'll answer to both. As far as like what gender is, and is it just about perception, or like what you're assigned at birth, or if those are the only two things that go into that. I think one of the great things that happened with the Chimamanda Adichie conversation is this idea that the way that you're perceived, even if it does, you know, match which you're assigned at birth, isn't necessarily an indication of your gender. And obviously this conversation has been going on way longer than that. But my gender, I never really necessarily identified with being a man. By the time I reached that age, I had already started questioning it. So the question of disidentifying from
Right.
it, that's an interesting way of putting it as well.
Right.
And that is because I started to feel, the ways that I talk about and think about my gender shifting in ways that don't make sense from a cisgender perspective. And a lot of that is just, the place that, I feel most comfortable with in terms of my queerness. I don't think that I don't have the same kind of connection to cis people as I do with other genderqueer, non-binary folks who are, on this journey with me. And for everyone, the journey is a little bit different. But I know that journey isn't, at least how I've experienced cisness. And so a lot of my identifying with being non-binary it is related to this like journey of like actually trying to find out what gender means to me. And I know it's not rooted in my appearance. I know it's not rooted in how other people perceive me. It's something more than that. I know that the ways that I limited myself when I was trying to force myself into this cis male experience didn't really allow for my whole existence. And and again, that's all a personal kind of journey, and just that has been my experience with, the ways that the cis spaces that I was in, and as opposed to other spaces,
Right.
um, and so yeah, I just think it's a very personal thing. If we understand that, gender is more than how you're perceived and more than the what you're assigned at birth, then it opens up a whole expanse for people to go on these different journeys. And again, I think that a lot of the limitations of gender were placed around Black people who were never meant to fit into these ideas anyway.
Right.
And even if that doesn't necessarily translate into, you know, being non-binary or not being cis, I think that those are necessary journeys for a lot of us to have. And this is the place that my journey has taken me. Um, I think I answered the question. There was a lot of parts to that.
Yeah.
Jen, you can let me know if I missed anything
No,
there.
I mean, I think you did answer the question. It's interesting because the question is posed kind of to both of us, but um, as a cis Black woman, a cis queer Black woman who has experienced gender in a very particular way. For me, um, I mean, I'm 6'4", and I was over 6 feet tall when I was 12 years old. So there was a certain kind of I experienced gender as kind of like a navigation of a negative space, as opposed to like the positive space of gender normativity, the positive space of those stereotypes that women should do this, Black girls should look like that, or those
Right.
things. And for me, because I was, I often say I have a genderqueer body because I break certain rules about, heterosexual cis woman kind of like body behavior and embodiment. And so
Right.
um, for me, I think I've always identified as a cis woman. However, I've been more comfortable in my adult life as just identifying as queer bodied, and as just a queer, um, not just queer sect, but also queer gendered. Because for me, I often struggle too with um, the kind of like burdensomeness of the categorization of woman. Sometimes it's
Mm-hmm.
just like yeah, but I think I've experienced my gender journey and experience has been very tough at times, and very liberating at other times, but never has felt like um, you know never felt heterosexual and never felt like just woman.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. And so I feel like I'm at a moment now where I'm comfortable like saying that and investigating that and troubling that and thinking through what those categories. So there were times where I really wanted to hold on to um, terms like woman because they had meaning for me. And I realized
Mm-hmm.
that I was using those types of terms um, to define a certain space in my life, right? I was trying to recapture, in some cases, what I thought I didn't have when I was younger. I was trying to feel, um, I was trying to feel like the binary. I was trying to feel like the norm because, in some respects, I felt like something had been taken from me. And
Right.
so I think that there are ways that even I think the question is interesting. Um, and I am a cis person. I often refer to myself as a cis Black woman, but I'm very cognizant of the fact that I've had a very queer journey in that womanhood, and so not to want to undermine or take away from that. So I don't know. I think the question's interesting because it gets to the question like, is gender a thing anyway? And like
Right.
this, right? And so it's like,
Yeah.
well, that's the real question, right? Like, um,
Right. I mean, I think a part of that question too is like taking up space.
Right.
At least that was like kind of the subtext that I got from it is like, do
Right.
you take up space when you claim this? And this is another one of the reasons why I write a little bit less about my gender journey, even though um, it's resonated with a lot of people, and I've been really happy with how I've grown from doing it, and I don't want that to stop.
Right.
But it is like it does get to a point where there are people who experience this non-binary identity very differently,
Right.
and they're not they already are not um, you know we don't focus a lot of our energy and attention onto them too, and so a lot of what I do now has been to try to recenter those voices,
Mhm.
especially because a lot of them have said already what I've said, and much better. There was a panel I was on recently for the Other Boys documentary series thing that I was on, and there were two. There was a trans man on the panel, and there was a trans masculine androgynous person on
Mhm.
the panel as well. And there was a lot of questions that people were asking those two people, particularly about the binary and like their experience. And
Right.
that was a moment where like, I didn't have to step in and reemphasize, oh hey,
Mhm.
look at me, I'm also not um,
Right.
binary, because there are these people who could speak to that, at least as well.
Right.
But also, that's I didn't need to do that. And a lot of my journey isn't to, grab the microphone or it shouldn't
Right.
be at least,
Right.
to grab the microphone and tell these stories, as much as it should be to just try to, work through my own thing. I think my gender journey is very, very personal.
Right.
Um, and it means something to me,
Right.
and that is the most important thing. Um, and I mean, and this isn't to take away from the fact that there are aspects to appearance, and there are certain things that I want to experience because I do, quote unquote, pass
Right.
as cis. Um, but that narrative can also not take over the take or overshadow the truth of the matter, which is like this is what gender actually is for me.
Right.
And back to your point, if gender is it also puts into question whether or not gender is real for Black
Right.
folks in general.
Right.
And I think what you're saying when you say you call yourself a cis Black woman, or that's how you usually refer to yourself. I think Black is that troubling word there,
Right.
that automatically, breaks things off from the binary,
Right.
and that's something that I want to explore a lot more, uh, too, because Black women are already not, allowed a certain type of femininity. Black men
Right.
are already not allowed a certain type to attain,
Right.
the sense of humanity that Black men and the sense of power or whatever that Black men attain. And what does that mean when we talk about gender?
Right.
Uh, Without, like if we do talk about gender without mentioning Blackness, we miss a very large part of the conversation. And so that's
Absolutely.
a part of what, uh, a lot of Black feminists and Black queer thinkers have been trying to do for a long time. And it's part of my work. And I've definitely seen that as part of your work as well.
Yes. That was amazing. We should have these more often. But yeah, so okay, so I think it's a really great question. It's probably something we should take up at the site. So I'm glad that we got this question. So whoever sent this, thank you so much, and we'll probably do more to write about that in the future. All
Oh
right,
yeah.
go ahead.
Oh, and I was gonna say, whoever that is, like I said, I used to write a lot about this, and some of those pieces, I think, go directly address this a little bit more in depth. So I can, if that person is connected to me on social media, they can always reach out, and I can point them in that direction, point them to other non-binary folks who are dealing with these questions too.
Dope. Okay. So the next question we got was, in the activism you've witnessed slash been a part of, where are the most necessary places that love needs to be more present? I love this question.
You want to go first?
Oh, well, here's the funny thing about this. I joined. Twitter like really, really late. And I actually started writing, I mean, kind of late in the game in terms of when a lot of young folks were actually starting to mobilize online and
Right.
use those spaces for types of activists, like grassroots kind of independent media. And so when I joined Twitter, I was always like, oh, we have to love each other. And like, we need to build community. And everyone was like, girl, bye. Like, and so I've had this stigma, you know, for like years where people are like, she always talking about love, but she, you know, like, and it's so funny because, you know, I do identify as Christian, and
Hmm.
me and the church have an interesting complex relationship right now. But you know, I've always been a person who is very much about loving our people, you know, to and through things. And I am a firm believer that the only reason why we are still here, that we are still breathing and still manifesting every day, is because, you know, somebody loved us enough to keep going, right? And so, like, I don't know. I have a very interesting relationship with this idea of love, because I do think that there are some spaces, you know, like for instance, like on Twitter, if you're talking about love, folks are just like, you know, like that's not, you tried it, like, but at the same time, I'm like, but y'all, I mean, if we are really doing this work, right? If we're really about that life, and our goal is really, you know, a collective movement toward liberation, or collective movement towards some type of like our idea, theoretical idea of justice, right? If we see this kind of ideal state that we haven't necessarily reached thus far, there absolutely is no possible way for us to actually meet it and attain it without some type of understanding of collectivity. And collectivity requires, you know, a mutual love. And I always refer back to Cornel West is Cornel West. He is who he is. But he preached a word when he said, you know, justice is just love in public. I agree with that. Like, I
Hmm.
actually full-heartedly agree that justice is a form of love in public. And so, I mean, I can't say like in terms of like the activism that I've witnessed, you know, where should there be love and stuff like that. I think that that's a really it's a complex question that requires a complex answer. I think that there's love everywhere. Like the fact that you and I are sitting here on this you know, live chat right now is us loving our people enough to say this is a conversation that we need to have. I think there's ways that people sacrifice their lives, and they make space, unpaid, you know, unremunerated time that folks dedicate to this work. And I think that that's a form of love for one's people. Um,
Hmm.
so I don't know. I think, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, my first response to that, there are two words that I used to talk about a lot and that I have a hard time talking about now because I don't think that we're on the same page when we mention them. And love is one of
Mhm.
them. Joy, black joy is the other one.
Oh, Black
I
Joy.
think we use those terms so often
Yeah,
without making sure that we're talking about the same thing.
right.
And then we get into a lot of stuff.
Yeah,
Um, and so for me, and I don't think that my idea of love should be or has to be the only one.
right.
But when I use it most often, um, I'm talking about a very particular kind of holding space for people. And I also don't like the word holding space,
Yeah.
but like, who do you show and reserve your energy and emotional labor for
Yeah.
when you don't have any.
Right.
When in an ideal world, we would have it all the time, but we just don't live there. And so when I think about like the love and like when I see it most often in my life, I think particularly to a story that a friend told me recently. This is someone who's everyone's always talking about, like, oh, you are like, always angry and you always going off on social media, blah, 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 blah. But he was telling me a story about how he got robbed on a train and when he fell asleep. And he just wrote this really beautiful long message about how he hoped these kids were black kids who needed it more than him.
Mm.
And that way of like being able to step outside of even like the things that hurt and shouldn't happen,
Right.
and still, you know, hold you put some energy toward people who may even have been the people who caused that situation.
Right.
And I think those are the moments, particularly where love is shown, is like when someone might be hurting you. Because I think in an anti-Black world, it's so hard not to even breathe without causing harm to other Black folks.
Right.
How do you not let that get in the way of, you know, what you want for them, and get in the way of you fighting for them to be free?
Right.
I think especially this is a big part of the prison conversation, like prison abolition. Like, what does it mean to say we don't want any cages around
Right.
murderers and
Right.
rapists? And I think that requires a really a powerful thing that I call love.
Right.
But when a lot of people are talking about love, they're not talking about that necessarily. And so I just think that we have to get on the same page before we can figure out where we need more of it, because there are different forms of love that we need in different spaces. I think I need more of that kind of love in my life, and in the lives of especially like the people that I care about.
Right.
Which is not necessarily in movement spaces. I think in movement spaces, there might be a kind of love that I don't show enough, which is, you know, being patient with people who are learning. And that is something that I might have a problem with.
Right.
But those are two very different things that sometimes can even conflict.
Right.
And so until we're talking about the same thing, it's hard to say where we need more of it.
I agree. And I think, I mean, that's interesting. So thinking about this idea of, you know, making space and giving time and patience when we don't even feel like we have it. I think that's actually a really good kind of way to conceive of love. And I don't know, I think that a lot of times, I think what's interesting is like this idea of like hurt. And what I've struggled with a lot is I feel like there's a lot of like not understanding that from love can come hurt, from hurt can come love. You know, that somebody may love you and still fuck up.
Right.
And then having to figure out how to love them through it, or how, you know, and I'm not saying that we have to stay in the relationships or situations that are abusive, but I'm just thinking about a lot of times, you know, as Black people, we do have to think through the complexity of those relationships in movement building and activism, and how a lot of us, most of us, all of us are still learning every single day, and we're going to fuck up. And then, so how do we love one another through the fuck ups too, right? So how do we continue to love one another and say, you know, you're still important, you're still valuable, you're still part of this work. But let me first let you know, right? Like from a place of love, like, let me check you real quick, and have it be okay. That's the thing I think that I've struggled with, where I'm like, check me. I mean, my friends check me all the time. And like, I love them for it, because I'm like, I know you're not gonna have me out here looking crazy, right? Like, you're not gonna have me out, excuse the English language, but you're not gonna have me out here, you know, harming folks and putting myself in positions and others in positions that are problematic, right? And so I'm like, we have to start thinking about the ways also that even when we fuck up and we're still learning and we're still working through, what are the parameters to which we are willing to continue to push those people, you know, from a place of love. I don't know.
And those parameters are going to change from situation to situation.
Right.
And I think that's fine, and really important. That's kind of gets back to what I was saying. But to your point about checking one another and holding each other accountable with love, I think that's kind of what I was getting at in the last status that I posted today, which was about how I get these like very conflicting perceptions. And I think a big part of it is because at least I'm trying to, and I don't always sometimes I fell at it. But what I try to do is know that at the end of the day, like I'm not getting rid of no black person at all.
Right.
Like that's not
Right.
going to happen. And
Right.
so when people come up against that limit, it seems like I'm not. If they miss all the other stuff, it'll seem like I'm letting black folks get away with everything.
Right.
But then the other part of that is like, in order for me to do that, I also have to make sure that you're holding yourself accountable, holding me accountable, and we're holding each other accountable, so that if I'm keeping you here, we don't both end up being
Right.
discarded from the
Right.
world.
Right.
And so that can sometimes look like being hypercritical,
Yeah.
and sometimes I might cross that line or whatnot. But what I'm trying to say is that a real loving kind of relationship knows where that line is, and again, it's
Right.
different in every situation.
Right.
But at the end, it's just knowing also that that person is not disposable,
Absolutely.
even if you gotta read them sometimes.
Read them for filth. Yes. So no, I absolutely agree. So I think we answered that question. That's a good one. All right. So next question. How did you both work through issues like inferiority complexes and mental health and assert your identities in your workplaces? Whew. That's an interesting one because it's past tense, and I'm like,
Right.
I'm still doing that.
Can you actually read it one more time?
So it says, how did you both work through issues like inferiority complexes and mental health and assert your identities in the workplace?
I can go first on that.
Yeah.
So I've had multiple workplaces, and now thankfully, like I'm working with y'all, I'm working at Afropunk, and I'm doing my own stuff. So I'm working with black folks. It's a very different and like weight off your shoulders kind of way. The experience that I had there versus, in past jobs versus what I have now. And what I have now is kind of new too, so I can't really speak to that. But in the past, asserting yourself in the workplace has been for me. I actually, as funny as it may seem, if you know me from like online or not, what I do at work and in the spaces with white folks in general, that I know I have to be in for a long period of time, I create a separate, wholly different community or like place I can go with the one or two other black folks who are there, unless they're not really down for that either. And just kind of like making sure that that space is like really healthy for me to get everything out, without having to that comes up, because it's going to be constant, which doesn't mean don't stand up for yourself and be assertive, but creating those spaces in whatever ways that I could. And it wasn't always with people. Sometimes it was spaces I knew where I could go. It was places I could go after work. Really helped me to deal with all the little things and big things that happen at work. And I know that that's like kind of, if you don't have access to these spaces or people at work that you can build those things with, that's not really that helpful. But that was how I made it through my spaces and through school, which is like work on a huge scale too.
Absolutely.
And in terms of inferiority complexes, the end of the main point I was trying to make is that I never felt like or wanted to feel like I was a part of the organization that I worked for if it was white. And again, I have the luxury of knowing that eventually I want to work with and for black folks. So it was mostly temporary too. And then as far as inferiority complexes go, as a writer, that's just something that you always are dealing with. I got to a point where I'm confident now that I can write a good essay. It might not be the most amazing essay ever, but I know that I can knock something out. But that's not even what my true passion is. I write also fiction and creative works, creative nonfiction, and it's really hard to uh, to find confidence, especially when you haven't gotten a lot of that work out there yet. A big part of that is just being with people whose work you love and admire and who you trust, who are going to be giving you loving feedback. There are about 3 or 4 people who I can send literally anything to, and they can say this is shit in a way that will not crush my spirit. One, because I know that they're sincere about all of their critiques, and they want me to do well.
Right.
And when a lot of people give you those kind of critiques, they don't have any hope for
Now,
you.
yeah.
But if you can find people who are willing to be both honest and there to support you through the, you know, the shortcomings or the things you need to work through, then that's really, really, really important. I say find like 2, 3 people at least who will be brutally honest but loving, and do the same thing for you for them. Like I think those relationships work, at least in my experience, because I was willing to do the same thing for them.
Right.
And it's kind of just like a agreement that you make with that person. Like I'm not gonna let you do some. I'm not gonna let you be out here with some shit, you know. Like
Right.
I'm going to look out for you and also believe in your talents.
Right.
And then just being the other side of that and being able to not take those things personally because you also trust that person.
Right. So, I mean, this question is really interesting to me, especially since we just had the Black Women at Work hashtag on Twitter.
All right.
And thinking about, so I have a very, I guess, I don't know, I have an interesting experience with work because I worked at Disney for 5 years.
I didn't know this.
Yeah. So it's funny because like I always tell people, and I say this in meaning it totally as it sounds, there was a point of my life where I was trying to assimilate into whiteness. That's just the truth. I was socialized in a community where, it was about respectability politics. It was about trying to contort oneself and to conform to certain norms about Blackness and public life. And I was, to a certain degree, after undergrad, I went to USC. After undergrad, I was really about that life. I was really about that, like, if I dress the right way, if I say the right things, if I, straighten my hair, if I wear the right clothes, then I will be accepted into the fold. I will be
Right.
protected. I will be, whatever. And there was a lot of, anti-Blackness embedded in that. There was a lot of really problematic understandings of gender and sexuality and Blackness that were all embedded in that. And it took actually my experience at Disney to help me unlearn that process, right? Because there were experiences where even when I thought I was behaving, right? So I'm like, okay, well, here's the formula. If I just behave, if I just act a certain way, then, this is what should happen. And then those things didn't happen, right? I was still co-opted. I was still exploited. I was still harmed. And there was a lot of, kind of violence toward me in that space. And so it took me going through that to say, wait a minute, like, wait, I've got this all wrong, and, a lot of it was naivete. A lot of it was me just not really having had these types of conversations before, not having read a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
I have an engineering undergrad. They did not care if I knew anything about gender and race and the world. It was like, you need to understand the statistics equation and
Right.
get that TI-89 pop in, right? So I think, for me, it wasn't until my 20s, my mid-20s, that I started really asking questions about inferiority complexes and asserting myself in the workplace. Because up until that point, I was pretty much willing to take anything. I was pretty much willing to just sit there and just be harmed. And so I think in terms of getting over that, I mean, I would not say that I've gotten over that at all. I still, I still struggle every day. I'm in academia. So I am with all sorts of people every single day. I have students who, when they walk into a classroom and see that I'm teaching, they're like, this is a joke, right? I mean, I have professors who, I'm lucky enough to have a really great group of faculty who are pretty dope, and faculty of color who are like literally my lifeline right now in academia. So I lucked out there, but I know that that's also not the norm. Academia can be very harmful, very anti-Black, and very violent. And I'm aware of that. That hasn't been my particular experience with my faculty at my current university. But I will say that academia itself, like the Ivory Tower itself, it's called the Ivory Tower for a reason, right? And so in that space, especially as someone who studies like race, class, gender, sexuality, I'm marginalized in a lot of disciplines. And the work that I do is marginalized in a lot of disciplines. And that's somewhere where you start to kind of ask yourself, like, am I doing this right? Is my work good enough? It happens. And I think, similar to what you said, what I've done is I have built a community of folks who I know I can call like sobbing, like, oh my God, why did I leave my job? Like I can call and they'll be like, Jen, I'm gonna let you finish, but and that has been so critically vital to my survival and to me being able to get up every day, get myself dressed, pull myself together, get in that car and drive to that campus. Because there are moments where it's like, I'm seriously like, why am I doing this to myself? Like, and also like, when it comes to the whole inferiority thing is like, when you're in an industries like writing or like academia, where a lot of your progress in those areas is dependent upon a certain level of production and a certain level of validation from other parties.
Right.
It's very difficult because I mean your livelihood is based on someone else's or lots of someone else's opinions or clicks or shares or whatever, or in the academy on publications or whatever that might be. And so there are going to be times where you don't get that thing. Like last week there was a fellowship I really wanted, didn't get it. And it hurt. Like I was like, so-and-so got it and this other person got it and I didn't get it. First thing I did was reach out to my people. I was like, hey, didn't get that fellowship. And 3, 4, 5 people in like a span of 24 hours, I talked to people on the phone and they were like, just so you know, this is not a reflection on you. You are amazing. Your work is critically important, And I think that that's something, that you have to build up around yourself. You have to insulate yourself. And I say this all the time, like the world is out here trying to kill you every day. Like we are out in this world surviving against all odds. Like and I was reading something and I posted something like this actually about this on your wall earlier, but that the black embodiment is inherently radical. It's inherently deviant. The fact that we decide to survive, we decide to live in a world that would rather we not. It's like going outside, can be so burdensome at times. It can feel like, wow, I am tired and all I have done is drive to campus, right? Or go to work or sit in my desk, right? And I feel like that's when we have to make sure we have folks around us who, and it is reciprocal, like you said, who will critique us when needed, who will collect us when needed, but who will also let us know when we're over here doubting ourselves and saying, oh, this essay is horrible, it's never going to get published or whatever. We'll be like, child, pitch that somewhere else, send that to
Yeah.
somewhere else, you know? And so I think for me, that has been like, since leaving corporate America, in particular, that has been so important and so vital to me being able to push through each day. So,
Yeah. And and it has to be very intentional.
yeah,
And not everybody is, the same extroverted person who's going to be like surrounding themselves with people. And I think this will get into one of our later questions, but I think even like utilizing social media for
yeah,
that. Some of my closest friends are people that I've met online who allowed me to, build that with them.
mm,
um, and I don't think you should, just like in any situation, you should be careful about who you're sharing things with. But I think that we kind of devalue the relationships that we build on social media a lot. And especially for people who don't have access to those people in the workplace, if they're maybe the only Black person there. It's really good to build those communities intentionally, wherever you can, and in as many
right,
places you can. I'm lucky enough that I was able to have that at work. I was able to have a good friend group. I live in Harlem, and most of the people that I mess with live here.
right.
But also, like, even that sometimes, like, that's not enough. So I create those spaces wherever I can, and social media and Facebook have been a big part of that too.
Absolutely. I like that question. Um, all right. So this is the second to last question. What were you doing before you became a writer? We almost just answered that.
Well, tell me more about this Disney. What were you doing at
Oh,
Disney?
what's really funny is so I think all growing up I would always write. I had journals. It was I wrote short stories. I wrote everything. And I also just I really love math. Like I was like, oh my gosh, like I would walk through the grocery store and like multiplication on the freezer aisle, trying to figure out how many boxes I had stepped on. It was just obsessive. But so I really wanted to be an engineer, and I could not reconcile. I was trying to figure out. I'm a first generation college student, and I was blessed enough to get to some schools that were willing to pay for me to go. And I'm like, I want to be an engineer, but I also really love, like, I was really passionate about social issues and writing. And I'm like, I cannot major in all this stuff. So I I went to USC, got an engineering degree, and I minored in sociology just so that I could have that stuff. And I was like, those were like my favorite classes. And I went to Disney. So I graduated at 22, and I was already married at the time. So I got married at 21, and went to Disney. And I was actually pregnant when I got to Disney. So very interesting intersection of things. But I was hired into like a salaried position, and it was like the one position on the team where they hired an engineer. Everyone else kind of came from other positions, and it was at Disneyland, right? So we were all backstage at Disneyland, and so some people had worked at the park for some time, and then they got their position. Most of them had been promoted up. I was the only young person. I was the youngest, and by far the youngest. So like I think the nearest person to me was like 10 years older than me. I was the only married person. I was also the only like new parent type of person, and I was the only Black person.
Wow.
So yes, um,
Sounds like that was a very lonely.
you know what? Like honestly, like it's one of those things where I'm like, I have to write this into like a sitcom or something one day because it doesn't even feel like it really happened to me. I'm like, that's not real. That wasn't real. But it was. And I mean, I had interns, white male interns who wanted to steal my work and then explain it back to me as if they had made it themselves. I got very, 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 very sick my first year. I actually had meningitis and I was hospitalized for a month. And during that time, people co-opted my work. They just took stuff off of the files and put it in their own files. And just, I came back and my boss was like, look what everyone did. And I was like, but actually that's and when I said no, actually, she was like, you need to be appreciative that everyone had your back while you were gone. I was like, oh shit, this is one of those situations. This is happening. So all the appropriation that could possibly happen, all of the undermining, the very racialized, very gendered, very problematic, things that could possibly happen. I spent a lot of time in the bathroom crying at work, and was just pretty much miserable. And what actually happened is that the political arena started to change. And increasingly, there were these highly publicized instances of Black death, these public lynchings that were happening. And I was getting more and more politicized. I was starting to ask questions because I was sitting at these intersections in my office. And I didn't have the language to describe what was happening. I didn't have, like, I knew I could feel what was happening, but I had not theoretically investigated any of that stuff. So I hadn't read, Audre Lorde and Bell Hooks and Melissa Harris Perry and Moya Bailey and Kathy Cohen. I hadn't read that stuff. And so during that time, I started to ask questions like, what is happening? Like, what am I experiencing? And what is the language that I need to have to be able to articulate what is happening and understand what's happening to me? And honestly, that's when I got really, like, I was like, you know what, this is not the place for me. This is not something I should be doing. I started writing then. So I started writing in about 2009, 2010, started a website, started Water Cooler Convos. And it was the first place, and those early pieces are trash. I mean, they are so, that is just flaming garbage. It is trash.
I know what that feels like.
But like, it was the first time I was starting to ask questions about like my body and like being in a corporate space and being this kind of very tall, read as heterosexual, cis person, and like just like what that meant and the ways I was performing in gender and the ways I was performing Black and the ways I was performing smart, just the ways I felt like I had to perform, certain embodiments of myself in order to kind of, get a paycheck. And what I was doing and what I was selling, what parts of my body I was selling, what part of my mind I was selling, for, job security and a pension or whatever. And so I think it was actually Disney. It's kind of funny because it was hell, but it was Disney that actually got me where I am now. I would not be asking the questions I am theoretically and with my research today. I would not be writing on the topics that I'm writing today. I really don't think I would be if I had not had that very specific kind of intersection of experiences and exploitations in that particular space. Because to a certain degree, Disney's one of those places where you're like, oh, this is the utopia. Oh, they just love everyone. They're so family-esque and they are just loving and no. No. And I think it was that sense of like betrayal where I was like, wait, this is not, I'm not working somewhere. You're supposed to do better. You're supposed to be better. And I think it was that sense of betrayal where I was like, something is not right. And what's not right, I mean, clearly the system and the structure is not right. But what wasn't right was me and the way I was orienting myself to white supremacy and the way I was orienting myself to anti-Blackness and orienting myself to capitalism. And I was like expecting something that was never promised to me, right? Like hoping something would manifest that was never actually tangible for me in the first place. And that's when I started kind of asking those questions.
I love that line, expecting something that was never promised. I feel like that applies to so much that Black people do in this world. And as on a basic level of like, just, for our lives to matter. Like, I don't know if that was ever promised. But that's another question. Or if we have any proof that, that this state it's even possible for the state to do that. But that's another conversation. were you finished? Did I interject?
Yes,
Did I
yes,
cut you
I'm
off?
done.
Okay, sorry. My journey into writing. Well, I've always kind of been a writer. I um, went to film school, so it was a different kind of writing.
Mm.
But I always knew I wanted to be a storyteller. Like I think I was like 5 years old when my dad first brought this VHS camera home, and I just like fell in love with it. And I was like, I want to tell stories. And as I grew up, I mean, in that moment, I wanted to see myself on screen.
Mm.
I grew up in a family of like 18 brothers and sisters too, so
Mm. Mm.
there were
Mm.
lots of times that I felt like, I'm not being centered in this. And for me, getting on camera was like, oh my God, I'm actually here. And that kind of manifested in different ways as I grew up and like grew into my queerness and started realizing, these aren't stories that are being told. And this kind of fits the theme of this conversation, which is like Black queer storytelling. But I kind of fell into this like idea of representational politics that really, I don't really feel the same way about now. But I still had that urge to like see myself on screen and like tell my stories. And at NYU, that's what I was going to do. I was going to become a Black queer filmmaker telling Black queer stories, which is really important. But I think what I discovered at that time is also the way that storytelling is structured, especially filmmaking in Hollywood, and the route that I was trying to go doesn't allow for those stories to be told authentically, or in a way that would be empowering or as a Black person to be fully like going working at NBC as an NBC page. I slowly realized this wasn't what I wanted to do, at least not in that way.
Mm.
And I started writing about the real stories that I wanted to tell that I didn't really find an outlet in these spaces where I was supposed to be able to tell my stories, because there was so much whiteness and so much there were so many things that were in place that, if you were to fully be present as a Black person, it was just too radical.
Mm.
That unfortunately, the way that filmmaking is structured and financed, the how it's and then things are changing now, thankfully, but the possibilities just weren't there. And so that's kind of how I started writing essays. And like I said, I still do fiction, I still do screenwriting, but essays were, for me, it was a different kind of world. One, I could start my own platform, which I did too. Also had some really terrible pieces at first. I was initially writing for a friend's blog. She had like seen me post about some things, and she asked me to write, and I did a couple pieces. Eventually, like some of them started really resonating, and when she shut down her blog, I was like, oh, I still want to write. I don't have anywhere else to write, so I started Race Baiter.
Mm.
And initially, Race Baiter was just me, like I was writing kind of regularly, piece every week or every other. And eventually I started developing kind of a relationship with readers that allowed my work to really kind of grow. I started getting published in other places. And what was really interesting is the ways that I wanted to, the kinds of stories that I wanted to tell, I found that I was able to tell through this medium. Even though I still have a passion for film, and I still want to eventually put stuff on the screen. But I would have never learned how to actually do that in an authentic way, I don't think, if I didn't also do essay writing. And so, yeah, so Race Baiter kind of started growing to the point where I don't write on it anymore and just publish other writers, which is a whole nother experience, editing. I mean, this is what we're doing at Black Youth Project.
Right.
Love. And I think a part of that is because I realized that my story so connected to so many other people's story, and it's like impossible to tell without recognizing that. And a big part of editing um, is is seeing other people's stories and also connecting with it in a way that doesn't take away from it, but from your
Right.
perspective. And that's what I really love about editing, is finding that connection between the writer and the editor. That, you know, even a story that's so very different from anything you ever experienced, still finding the moment where you and that person meet on an intellectual level. So yeah, so that's pretty much where I am now. And now I'm just writing full time, which is great, and working on some longer term projects that are more in line with what I want to do um, ultimately. But it's also changed in a lot of ways. Like I used to think that I was just doing essay writing until I could get back to fiction or whatever.
Yeah.
But I love this so much, and not even so much the writing part, but the editing part and the creating space for other writers. So whatever I do will definitely um, maybe now I want that to last as long as possible and be a place for other writers to develop their voices in similar ways. So yeah, that's pretty much where I am and how I got here.
Dope. So we have one question left. I'm kind of sad. It's a simple question. How important is social media to your roles as storytellers? I feel like I'm ashamed to answer this question because I'm on social media all day.
I mean, I could go first. I mean, let's kind of back to what I was saying earlier.
Yeah.
It has been, I developed a lot of the relationships with folks, other writers, who were able to be really honest and loving towards my work. Um, and I really don't know where my writing would be without that, especially. And hopefully I would have been able to find that elsewhere. But I know social media is really, really great about putting writers, especially, in contact with one another. Um, and I know that we discussed, you know, doing something formal with putting a lot of writer and writerly type folks together, which I think would be really, really great.
Yeah.
Um, because that has been the most amazing thing in terms of my writing, has been the connections that I've met, that I made with people online. And things. I just now kind of realized that my Facebook presence is a thing. It didn't really feel like that for a long time. So I'm still kind of dealing with what that means. I definitely, obviously, helps with, you know, like you were saying, a lot of writing is about getting validation from people, and there's definitely a great, uh, especially in terms of like making this profitable. It's definitely a great thing to have people who are already invested in your work.
Right.
And social media provides that. On the flip side, the way that Facebook algorithms and all of these other things make me really hesitant um, to praise these platforms.
Right.
Other, I would love to do that, because I don't think that we should be relying upon these platforms. But I think Black folks has found really amazing ways to use them to our advantage, Twitter especially. But at the end of the day, they're not really, they're not supposed to be here for us, and so in a lot of ways they're not. This goes into who gets censored, who gets
Right.
blocked, all of those.
Right.
I think right now we are doing a really good job of taking what we can from these platforms as Black people in media in general.
Right.
But eventually we have to I think at least. And you can share your views on that. You have to figure something else out. And I mean,
Yes.
a big part of like the what we're dealing with now with Black Youth Project, even in the way that our stuff gets or doesn't get attention on Facebook because
Right.
of all the things that happen, is just really, really ultimately not great for Black folks. So
Right. Right. I mean, it's interesting because so like social media, like you just said, you realize that your Facebook is a thing. And it's funny because I feel like I realized that recently about my Twitter. I was like, wait, I tweet things now and people see them and send them to other places and care about what I just said. And what that's actually done is made me tweet less because I'm like, oh, you actually think this is important. So I'm going to be more thoughtful. Um,
right.
and I mean, I would say like what's been so vital for me at the time when I was becoming politicized and really starting to think about myself in a kind of larger framework of the U.S. and understanding myself as a part of a larger kind of collective movement of young people. Um, I went straight to social media to find more people. For me, it was like people are talking about this stuff and I need to know who they are and where they are and how to meet them and go see them at this college or at this whatever. And I need to know what people are reading. One thing that I love about Black folk on social media is let somebody drop some fire on The Atlantic or Salon or Root or whatever, we are going to circulate that thing 700,000 times. And so, like,
Right.
and then it's like you see somebody in real life. Did you read that thing? Did you read what someone said? Oh, girl, yeah, that was fire. Like, that's what I really enjoyed about being a writer and an editor and been relying on social media for is I really like the kind of like collectivity that we have been able to build across like state lines, across international borders, like the ways that we have been able to connect Black diasporic people across previously unattainable boundaries and really build like kind of collective thought and start pushing through some kind of really concrete ideas about the world that we envision for ourselves. That's what's important to me about social media. I think,
Mhm.
you know, I would like to believe that we just use social media differently because we're just inherently different. Like I would like to believe that there's a certain type of kinship among Black people, among Black folk, that we just have, and it's
Mhm.
just ours. And I think that social media has made it so that it's a lot easier for us to leverage those connections in ways that are very
Right.
productive and that end up making really beautiful actions. I'm looking at the works of like folks like Miriam Kaba and like Darnell Moore who've organized entire marches and like demonstrations on social
Right.
media. And so I don't know. I'm happy. I'm just happy to be alive at this moment and to be relatively young at this moment to be able to be a part of this stuff. Um, because and this is part of my research too, in my dissertation project, is I am convinced that this is a particular moment. This contemporary political moment has major implications for the future of what we think about in terms of democratic life, in terms of liberalism, in terms of freedom, in terms of liberation. I think at this particular moment we are doing um, a type of work that actually hasn't manifested in the same way previously. And so for me, social media is a very, very significant part of that. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Is that, wait, oh no, that's our last question. We have to do
Wait,
this more
did
frequently.
some? Yeah, we do. I know someone was asking on the video how to ask more questions. I told them to share, but I don't know.
Well, there's a group chat thing here. But I think what we can do is we can just have these, regularly, and we can have other staff folks on. And we are talking about getting a podcast. So, I mean, if folks like it, I think we can definitely set it up so that we're doing this more regularly and we're taking questions and publicizing it and having it be a larger thing.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'll
Yeah.
actually come to New York and we can do it in the same room.
Yeah. When is the next time you're supposed to be here? Do you
Here's the
have it
thing.
on?
I haven't been to New York since I was like 17 or something. I've just, it's just so busy and
Do you
loud.
not like it?
It- do I not like it? It's New York is New York, and I feel like I wasn't ready. Like I feel like I wasn't mentally ready. But I would come for you. So, or we can just meet in the middle. I don't know, but we definitely have to do this more
What?
often.
Yeah, we do. I mean, my sister lives in Chicago, so usually I go there like once a year. I haven't been in like a year.
Oh, you've got to
So
come.
maybe I'll be there soon.
You've got to come, and we've got to do it again, and we'll take more questions. And yeah,
I think this was great.
I do
I love the
too.
question.
I feel like it was way better than I even anticipated. So I'm kind of excited about this. But so I guess we can conclude then. So we
I'll
can
say
go
that
ahead.
now.
Yeah, we can go ahead and conclude it. But yeah, thank you, Hari, for being wonderful as usual. And thank you all for joining us. And for people who are watching it later, thank you for watching. Please follow our YouTube, subscribe, and go to blackyouthproject.com if you'd like to see more from us and from our staff. I think that was pretty official.
Worked for me.
All
Bye,
right.
everybody.
Bye.
And bye, Jen. We'll catch up
See you.
shortly.
Bye.
Bye.